I was in middle school, I learned how to skate. See, I used to play a lot of Tony Hawk Pro Skater, and skateboarding seemed like a cool thing to do. The skaters at school were cool too. So I got a pair of airwalks with flames embroidered up the sides, and I borrowed a board from an older neighbor. Now, I wish this was a story of how I practiced night and day and got super good at skating. I didn't. I could barely do anything, and I was too afraid of hurting myself to even really try that hard.
Do that again.
In fact, most of the time I spent at the skate park was just standing around trying to look as cool as everybody else looked. See, because for me, skating wasn't really about learning something new or getting good at something. It was about identity. You know, this is a huge part of growing up. We try on personalities almost like we try on clothes. We try out being all of these different things as we're figuring out who we want to be. And even though my skating days are ridiculous, this is actually a good and normal part of growing up. It's normal for you as teenagers to be figuring out who you are. This is part of navigating life in high school. But there's also a danger in this. And the danger comes into play when we take something that describes us and instead allow it to define us. In biblical times, a lot of people define themselves by their honor. Honor and dignity were super important in their culture. There were certain ways to behave and dress and treat others and be treated by others, and all of these cultural expectations ruled over them. So whenever someone did something that was an insult to honor, that was a really big deal. It would be like Princess Catherine, the Duchess of Cambridge, going outside in her pajama pants. That was just something that would never, ever, ever happen. So these people in the Bible, they valued their honor so much that it often became infused into their identity. So instead of simply being described as upright, honorable people, they were defined by that honor. So what's so incredible is all these examples in scriptures of people encountering Jesus and leaving behind their old identities. Whether it's Zacchaeus climbing up a tree, which was a very undignified act, or the disciples dropping their nets in the water to come and follow after Jesus, leaving behind the careers they had trained for their entire lives, or this sinful woman who laid everything at the feet of Jesus, washing his feet with her tears and her hair. And then there was this Pharisee, which is a Jewish religious leader, and his name was Nicodemus. And he came to Jesus in the dead of night because he didn't want anyone to know that he was talking to Jesus. And then he's the guy who comes after Jesus dies to embalm the body. And Jewish people back then weren't even allowed to touch dead bodies. And then we've got Mary and Joseph, the earthly mother and father of Jesus. They had to cast aside their reputations and their good standings in their communities. See, the woman at the well that Tom talked about last week, her identity was completely changed after an encounter with Jesus. Because Jesus does this thing where he offers a new identity. He gives us a new way to define ourselves as dearly loved children of God. So for each of these people stripping away their identity, it's because Jesus has offered a new identity, and it's so much better than the one that they had before. And it doesn't depend on anything that they could do or say. Peter, a disciple of Jesus, writes about this identity, and this is how he defines it. I'm reading from 1 Peter 2. But you are not like that, for you are a chosen people. You are royal priests, a holy nation, God's very own possession. As a result, you can show others the goodness of God, for he called you out of the darkness into his wonderful light. Once you had no identity as a people. Now you are God's people. Once you received no mercy. Now you have received God's mercy. And then he tacks on this warning. Dear friends, I warn you as a temporary residents and foreigners to keep away from worldly desires that wage war against your very souls. These worldly desires that wage war against our very souls. His language feels so harsh here. But Peter knows full well the danger of allowing the things of the world to define us. You cannot allow something that describes you to define you. Because these things of the world are temporary, and if we lose them, all of life falls apart. See, if you define yourself by your ability to play soccer and you get hurt and you can't play anymore, your life is shattered. If you define yourself by your academic abilities, you're going to be crushed when you meet someone smarter than you. But when you allow yourself to be defined by Jesus, then you get to rest in the knowledge that you are loved. You can try out different things. There's freedom to try and to fail. There's freedom to turn a corner because you are only defined by who Jesus says you are. So what might it look like if we acted like this chosen people, these royal priests, this holy nation is God's very own possession? See, Peter tells us as a result, we're able to show others the goodness of God. See, when we're all caught up in trying to find our own identity, we aren't doing much to show others the goodness of God. When we aren't even offering grace to ourselves, we're not likely going to offer it to others. But once we are rooted in our identity, we get to live out our purpose. You know, I think back to my time in middle school, to all the time I wasted trying to define myself. I was trying to find my identity and feeling so insecure and unsure all the time, I wasn't able to live in my purpose. Figuring out who you are is tricky. And adults have the same trouble, trying to define ourselves by that which ought to describe us. So as you go through life, as you navigate the halls of your high school, remind yourself that only Jesus is allowed to define you. Because the world is going to try really, really hard in so many ways and from so many angles. Don't let it. Let your faith be stronger than those voices. Let God's truth drown out the other noise. My hope and my prayer for you is that you might allow yourself to be defined by Jesus as a dearly loved child, because the rest is just details.